It's Dragon Ball Dissection, back again. We are landing our spaceship in the cult, so make sure you don't drink the Kool-Aid. The lewd aid. But, stay hydrated. So last time within the narrative, Pan and Giru were whisked away to the lewd planet without Goku and Trunks. Outside of the narrative, the powers behind Dragon Ball GT came to the conclusion their original plan of stringing together fun adventures of collecting the Dragon Balls wasn't working, and so decided to start shifting the narrative. And that led to this 6-episode storyline we began last time of Goku and the others chasing after the Plethora brothers and becoming wrapped up in this lewd cult. As I said last time, what I consider one of the biggest strengths of this first story arc is how gradually and gracefully it decides to shift its focus. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of elements that reek of desperation, but the sheer fact that Dragon Ball GT takes its time to set its new course in motion feels so good. There is never a sensation of slamming on the brakes and suddenly pivoting to something completely different. This evolution is smooth to the point you'd almost believe it was planned this way from the beginning. It's so smooth that I posit there are 5 distinct phases in making this transition, which is a heck of a lot more effort than simply, oh, you thought these were the bad guys? This is the bad guy now, surprise! Right now, we are in the first phase, and it's a change that is so subtle you'd only really notice it in retrospect. The Plethora brothers steal a Dragon Ball. On its face, it seems like the setup to another new adventure, just like any of the other ones. And it is mostly that, a self-contained adventure. Goku and the others go to a planet with a cult. They stop the cult, they reclaim the Dragon Ball, they continue on. However, there are some subtle shifts in the storytelling. At 6 episodes, this is the longest individual story by far GT has told. It's twice as long as the Omega storyline, which had been the longest up until now. Another shift, one that feels like desperation, is that this adventure starts leaning in a bit more to traditional Dragon Ball Z elements. There's a bigger focus on fighting. And speaking of Cell, this contains a really awful string of villain fake-outs. Yes, I know I just got done making a point of contrasting this storyline with Cell's tendency to do exactly that, but I meant it in the macro sense. As much as I like to pick on Cell, it's actually a bit of an insult to compare him to this. But we'll get to that. Most importantly, this phase lays the first breadcrumbs linking this to the larger storyline, introducing at the end a bigger villain pulling the strings of this seemingly standalone plot. Stay tuned to my later videos to find out what the other 4 phases are! In some ways, this plot is a showcase for Pan, for better and for worse. She has some great moments here. When she's forced to listen to Mochi Mochi monologue about his cult, she uses the opportunity to snatch the Dragon Ball and make a run for it, which is hilarious. When Mochi Mochi in turn transforms her into a doll, he quips at her rudeness at not listening, which is also pretty funny. In her capacity as a doll, she leads the charge that ultimately defeats Lewd, which is a great sequence. Nestled in between all of that though, she's basically the damsel in distress, a literal doll that Goku and Trunks must save. And bookending all of that are the reminders of why I hate her. Episode 11 opens with a far too long sequence of Pan bullying and abusing Giru for not single-handedly solving their predicament. She uses her lady shtick to attempt to manipulate Giru into going to the castle he can already tell is dangerous. And when she is finally rescued, the first thing she does is beat him up some more. She threatens him with a steel pipe and puts her foot through the floor of a spaceship because Giru has the audacity to insult her by claiming that she's dangerous to him. Yeah, Giru, what are you being so uptight about? She just wants to go full Jason Todd on your ass. What's scary about that? Pan can be so incredibly loathsome, and while I will definitely not say it justifies the really terrible things she goes through in this story, I will say it at least justifies Giru accidentally dropping her into a trash pile. That is satisfying to see. What this story really wants to be about is its twists. Well, I don't know if it wants to be twisty or if it just frequently loses confidence in what it's doing. Regardless, the revolving door of villains in these episodes is the worst part of it. I mean, there is a cute fake-out. Mochi Mochi introduces his pet Leon to fight Goku, only for Goku to drop a rock on its head. That's funny. But across these 6 episodes, we get 5 layers of peeled back villainy. For example, Mochi Mochi's not in charge. Doltaki is actually the founder of Ludism. We already have a prayer giver for this cult who turns people into dolls. Do we really need the twist of the actual cult leader who also turns people into dolls? Why do we need both? They're functionally the same. And that's not even the worst one. The whip is a twist. Mochi is the guy and Muchi is the whip, and it turns out the whip was in charge. What? That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Oh, but it's clever, see, because Muchi means whip and Mochi means carry. It's foreshadow, don't you see? And there's nothing wrong with having defined roles and hierarchies, it's fine. But every single one of these is treated like this amazing pullback that you're just going to be so impressed to find out the truth. But even if that were the case, which it's almost certainly not because we don't spend enough time with these people before they're replaced, there are diminishing returns here. You can't just pull a twist out every episode and expect people to care. After a while, they're not even going to believe you anymore. Using every random baddie as an ultimate villain fake-out is just a cheap way of getting to the next cliffhanger. They're well versed in Dragon Ball to know that the series relies a lot on escalation and serialized twists, so they just want to cram in as much as possible. Oh, you thought the Para Para brothers stole your Dragon Ball? No, it was Mochi Mochi pulling the strings. Oh, you thought the creepy guy doing all the talking was in charge? No, he was just holding the whip. Oh, you thought the creepy guy and/or the whip was in charge? No, they just work for Doltaki, the true founder of this religion who hasn't been seen in 20 years. Oh, you thought Doltaki was in charge? This whole religion is just a front for Dr. Mew's experiments. Unfortunately, in Dragon Ball GT, twists are often used as a substitute for a story, and this is its worst offender. Muchi, who I must remind you is a whip, has telekinetic powers. He summons swords and makes rocks and tiles fly around. It's creative enough, although Goku wielding a sword suddenly makes me wish he'd brought Nyoibo on this trip. But the sudden existence and complete uselessness of Muchi makes me think the writers wrote themselves into a corner. Since they wanted to hold back Lud until later, they needed a combat threat to keep Goku and Trunks occupied, but they didn't think that the old dude would be believable in that role, and they threw away that one robot on a joke. And then, since they'd undermined the authority of the old dude, suddenly we need this other guy to really be in charge. So many of these steps are redundant. Dr. Mew is your twist. He's the only twist you need, the only twist that matters, so don't dilute it. Beyond that, you need a guy seemingly in charge and the muscle. So keep Doltaki, keep Lud, cut out Muchi and Mochi and Muchi Mochi. Put Doltaki in the hooded robe so he can stay creepy and intimidating until you reveal that he's... well, let's put a pin in that. If you really need to buy more time, maybe have some of the cultists fight. Or use the whip. Just say there's a sentient fighting whip. He doesn't need to be in charge of anything. He doesn't have to be a twist. He can just be a whip monster. There, I streamlined your story. You're welcome. Time to go back to the pin. It's Doltaki, by far the most memorable part of this storyline. He's a weird-looking alien with no nose, a bad haircut, and a Sailor Moon flashlight that allows him to Jonestown all of his cultists. He's the man behind the curtain, if not the man behind the curtain, so you'd think he's pretty intimidating. However, there's a twist, and I don't mean that as a dirty word this time. It's a character twist, not a who's in charge twist. As his name implies, Doltaki is actually a doll otaku. He has the perfect job because he's obsessed with collecting dolls, and the lewd feeding mechanism allows him to pilfer cute ones he'd rather keep. Like Pawn. And I'll give him credit. In some ways, this is a very interesting villain. His technology grants him a certain level of power over others, but he's not your typical strong fighting villain. He's conniving and wincing and pathetic, so that when he loses his power and is suddenly at the mercy of those he's victimized, it feels really satisfying. He has a distinctive personality, which elevates him head and shoulders above Muchi Mochi. He's very creepy, and the story frames him in a way that is very much aware of that. And I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but remember we're also in a story that frames Pawn's abuse of Giru as somehow charming and relatable. At least Doltaki's abuse is framed as abusive. It's also nice that Suzuoki Hirotaka is cast as Doltaki. He does a fantastic job at making this guy quirky and creepy and absolutely relishing in his indulgences. I hate to say it, but this guy's talents were wasted on Ten Shinhan, who spends most of the franchise as a sentient meat pile of boring stoicism. All that said, while the character concept is good, I'm not sure if I feel the same way about what they do with him. Obviously, a doll collector is nefarious in the sense of taking away a person's autonomy. However, there wouldn't exist much in the way of stakes if all he did for 2 episodes was put Pon in various innocent doll scenarios. Instead, the ticking clock element is that Doltaki sees Pon as far more demure and traditionally feminine and is insistent on putting her in a new outfit. So the drama is predicated on whether or not Doltaki can succeed in taking off Pon's clothes. And that is just unpleasant. I mean, look, they could have just had Pon in a new outfit in between scenes and not really addressed what that meant. It's a cartoon. The tone is relatively lighthearted. You don't have to explore all real-world implications. But since the show focuses so heavily on the importance of this act, both for her and for him, the coded message, and it's not even coded all that subtly, is that this is a story about sexual assault. Just why? Pon even laments at one point that if he succeeds in undressing her, no one will want her as a bride. That is just such a disgusting line. Not only is it tying a victim's value to her assault, it's just the absolute wrong tone for this show. Oh, you thought you were getting a story about a wacky villain with a weird hobby? No, we had to go and make it real. For the silly comedy villain. Are you having fun yet? Now, you might find it odd of me to say all of that, given that Dragon Ball has traditionally gotten a lot of mileage out of raunchy sex pest humor. Pon is the Bluma character after all, and Bluma was placed in a lot of weird sexual situations. But I do think there's a difference. Now, I want to be careful here, because if I start comparing the two, it's going to be hard for it not to come across like any condemnation I give of what happens to Pon is implicitly justifying everything that happens to Bluma. I'm just talking about the difference in the writing and the framing of these fictional scenarios. At the very least, Bluma is presented as far more sexually mature and sexually confident. She is given agency in most of her situations. The tone is so removed from reality that any shenanigans are treated as mildly embarrassing, not traumatic. None of those traits apply to this situation with Pon. She is presented as absolutely helpless in and thoroughly horrified by this scenario, yet it's still treated as lighthearted and fun. The tone is neither absurd enough nor realistic enough, stranding it in this uncomfortable limbo between silly and threatening. It just doesn't work. Also, it's pretty obvious that Doltaki is a queer-coded villain, someone who is feminine and delicate and likes to play with dolls. It's shorthand that trusts the audience to make the connection between such a character and sexual predation of children, that his interest and aesthetic are signs of his sickness. It's like animated General Blue. Toei just has a fantastic track record with both of these subjects. It should go without saying that playing with dolls doesn't make him a predator. It's using actual people as said dolls that does. At the end of the day, I can't complain about it too much since the episodes don't dwell on it a lot. Not as much as I remembered. But for what is there, it's just the wrong direction. Speaking of Pon, she is not simply a doll during all of this. She can't physically do anything, but she is conscious of what is happening and is given an inner monologue. At least, I think it's an inner monologue. Most of the time it seems like no one can hear her, but there are a few instances where it seems like certain characters can. I'm not sure if GT knows. To return to the positives though, Doltaki is also where the twists actually contribute something to the story. See, Doltaki sacrifices all the cultists to awaken Lude to take care of Goku and Trunks so that he can play with his new doll unimpeded. And that's engaging enough when you think he's in charge. But when his shadowy overlord suddenly comes out to play and is super pissed that Doltaki summoned Lude before he reached full power, the dynamic shifts. Dr. Mew wants his creation used properly, not wasted and wrecked. Realizing that Pan is from the same group as Goku and Trunks, he thinks sacrificing her to Lude, which she would have been in the first place if not for Doltaki being a big weirdo, will bring Lude to full power. Now you have Pan, who's been creeped out by Doltaki this whole time, suddenly rooting for him because he's the only thing keeping her from being sacrificed. It's an uncomfortable alliance, and in a good way, because it challenges how we, the audience, think about things. It's a brief alliance, though, as Dr. Mew turns Doltaki into a doll and sacrifices them both, which does indeed allow Lude to reach his full potential. And now that Pan and Doltaki are on even footing, Pan makes sure to get her revenge. And yes, it should go without saying that I am totally okay with Pan physically lashing out at her kidnapper and abuser. The best part is that Doltaki then complains that Pan has become a barbarian, not his adorable little Pan-chan, to which she asserts that this is her real self. It perfectly demonstrates what an abuser he is. He loves dolls because he can make them into what he wants them to be without any regard for who they are. It's about control. He objectifies Pan, turning her into a literal object to do so. This interaction also demonstrates the ethereal spirits of the dolls get to actually move and interact inside Lude. Somehow. They keep their individual personalities, they can think, they can talk, they can even physically affect Lude. The victims are in far better shape as sacrifices than as dolls. That seems like a pretty big design flaw, honestly. You really think all of Cell's victims were swimming around inside him, ready to sabotage him from the inside? It's a stupid design, but I can overlook it given how creative it makes the finale. When all of his victims descend upon him, Doltaki blurts out that he's the only one who can save them, which he immediately regrets saying. I have no idea why that is. Why wouldn't he want to say that? It's literally the only leverage he has to keep these people from rightly tearing him to bits. He says that Dr. Mew will punish him if he helps the victims, but so what? He already sacrificed you to Lude. I know the accommodations are far better than they have any logic to be, but what else could he do to you? Because he's inexplicably unwilling to talk, the Plethora brothers have to coax the information out of him with another of their dances. They do a call-and-response game of innocuous questions that Doltaki is compelled to answer, ending of course in asking what Lude's weakness is. It's the particular cell that spawned him. Oh goody, Cell again. The Plethora brothers are definitely a bright spot here. Goku and Trunks brought them along to planet Lude only for Mochi Mochi to immediately sacrifice them. Now they reveal that they have the telepathy to contact Goku, but they have to sing it like a doo-wop group, complete with the appropriate accoutrement. You know, except for when they do speak normally, but now isn't the time to bring that up, Pan. These guys are so much fun. See, it turns out that Pan can't hit the cell by herself. I mean, she definitely can hit it. She can fire ki blasts. Yeah, 2 steps removed from her own body, and trapped as a ritual sacrifice, she can still fire ki blasts. I'm beginning to think this process was an upgrade for all of them. At any rate, both Pan and Goku have to hit the spot from both sides of Lude at the same time. The only problem? No matter how the Plethora brothers try to count them in, they just can't sync their timing. And that does make sense. They'd have to be firing from the same distance, with the blasts traveling at the same rate of... Oh, wait, it has nothing to do with that? It's just because Goku doesn't have any rhythm? Well, okay. I don't see how that makes any sense given that he once had to teach 2 children a coordinated dance. Wait, actually, that does make sense. Remember how I spent so much time 2 years ago complaining about how inconsistent the series was with how long it took to learn the fusion dance? Well, there we go. It turns out the dance was as stupidly easy to learn as it seemed. Goku just thought it would take a week because he sucks at it. Look at that. GT actually made original Dragon Ball better. Apparently even counting to 3 is too much for Goku to work with, so he suggests the chant of pork bowl, tempura bowl, chicken and egg bowl. With that, Lude is defeated and everyone is released. The heroes reclaim their Dragon Ball. The only dangling thread is that Doltaki is missing. Upon being returned to his body, he somehow managed to fly away in a ship. Given that he was so terrified of helping Pan and the others due to the threat of Dr. Mew's punishment if he did, he naturally flies as far away from Dr. Mew as he can possibly get. Oh no, wait, he does the opposite of that. In the following episode, he returns to base, trying to spin this as a victory due to discovering such powerful people. It turns out it's not Dr. Mew though, it's his subordinate, General Rild, with whom Dr. Mew has left a simple message for Doltaki: die. A fitting end for an awful guy, but far and away the most memorable antagonist this series has produced thus far. Certainly leagues more entertaining than the guy killing him. General Rild is such a snooze fest, but that's a story for another day. The lewd cult storyline is definitely a mixed bag. On the one hand, it has its creepy pedo villain as well as a pileup of useless villains that make the Dragon Ball pantheon look well thought out by comparison. It showcases the best and worst of Pan. Trunks doesn't get too much to do beyond killing the most worthless villain. I'll never understand why reviving this doll needed to be dragged out over the course of 20 years. But it has some wonderfully creative and whimsical fight scenarios as well as amazing characters. It just needed some pruning and revisions. For all of its flaws, and there are many, it's probably the most entertaining story GT has done up to this point, showing that Phase 1 has managed to accomplish its goals. Before we move into Phase 2, there's one final episode for the old guard, and it's all about Pan and Giru. Be still, my heart. That's enough Dragon Ball dissection for today. If you're interested in more doll content, my Mario doll features heavily in my Super Mario Bros. Fashion Extravaganza video. Fashion Extravaganzas. They're not just for Dragon Ball anymore. And I can guarantee you I don't do anything creepy with my Mario doll. At least not in this video. My 2011 video, that's a different story. But I'd like to think I've grown as a person. Thanks so much for watching. Next time we really dig into the character of Pan. I've been looking forward to this one. I'll see you next time!